I just had the time of my life with that $20,000 you've been saving. My mother-in-law, Isabella, greeted me with a triumphant tone when she called after returning from a luxurious 7-day overseas trip. 20,000? What is she talking about? I thought to myself, confused. I knew I didn't have $20,000 stashed away. As a freelancer, I do have some emergency savings, but they're safely in my bank account, and my banking card is right here. How could she have gotten access to that much money? You gave it to me, remember? I found it in the sideboard drawer. You and Anthony are well off, so it's no big deal, she said matter-of-factly. What? I was in shock but didn't fully understand what she meant. It was clear that she had spent a small fortune. Before I could respond, she added, "Thanks, you can count on me for next time." Then, she hung up. $20,000? What money is she talking about? The answer came when Anthony, my husband, got home. Oh, so that's what happened, he sighed. A month passed, and Isabella bombarded us with over 80 calls, all of which I ignored. I was bewildered by her persistence, but she brought this on herself. Eventually, as yet another call rang in, I hesitated but answered it out of sheer frustration. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Isabella shrieked. What does she mean? I thought, she's only suffering the consequences of her actions. Let me backtrack a bit. My name is Scarlett, and I'm a 32-year-old freelance jewelry designer. I want kids, but right now, I'm swamped with work. My husband, Anthony, is also 32, and though he used to have a corporate job, he now supports me by managing my business. When we first got married, my design work was just starting out, and we relied heavily on Anthony's salary, but as my business grew and my career gained traction, I needed someone to manage my schedule and negotiations. Anthony stepped up, leaving his promising corporate job to become my manager. Together, we've secured contracts with well-known international brands. Despite our professional success, we've had our share of personal challenges, mostly thanks to Anthony's mother, Isabella. She lives alone and constantly assumes we're living in luxury, often asking for money. "You two always seem to be living the high life. I'm so envious," she would say. To her, my business dinners and events looked like extravagant leisure, but they were vital to my work. Still, Isabella felt entitled to the same lavish lifestyle. "I'm hosting a party for my friend soon. Can you give me some money to cover it?" she asked one day. Of course, I couldn't just hand out money whenever she asked. What she didn't understand was that while my job might appear glamorous, the expenses add up, and we aren't rolling in cash. But Anthony, being her son, occasionally caved and gave her some money just to keep the peace. If giving her a little helps quiet her down, it's worth it, he reasoned. But with each handout, her demands only grew. It was exhausting. "I need a new dress for an event," she declared recently, pestering Anthony yet again. "Can't a simple suit do?" I suggested, but Isabella wasn't having it. She always wanted something extravagant and never cheap. "It's a fancy party. I can't wear something old while everyone else is dressed to the nines," she complained. Before leaving, she added, "Oh, and I'll need a matching handbag too." Anthony had given her a credit card in her name a while ago to cover her expenses, hoping it would limit her constant requests. She overspent in no time, of course, and after being warned by Anthony, she grudgingly started telling us what she planned to buy, though that did little to change her habits. One time, she nonchalantly informed us, "I bought this gorgeous ring the other day. Sorry for the late notice." The bill? Outrageous. "If you're going to spend like this, we'll need to take the card back. We can't keep covering this." Anthony had had enough. Even though the card was in Isabella's name, we were the ones paying the bill. To her, it seemed like endless free money. Anthony eventually imposed a spending limit on her card, hoping it would curb her excesses. Naturally, Isabella was furious. "Why couldn't I pay for my shopping last week?" she ranted, storming into our house. "We had to lower the limit, Isabella. You've been overspending. The new limit is still reasonable," Anthony calmly explained. "You two still dress up and go to fancy places. How is what I'm doing any different?" she snapped. "Isabella, it's for work. Those events are part of our job." "Job? You call dressing up and going to fancy dinners work? How unfair that you get to enjoy all the fun while I'm stuck with this," she argued, completely missing the point. Although she simmered down after the limit was set, her demands never fully went away. Occasionally, she would still show up, pushing Anthony for money. For a brief period, though, life returned to something resembling normalcy. As the end of the year approached, my work took an exciting turn. A well-known international brand reached out, offering a proposal to expand our business overseas. I could hardly contain my excitement. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. If all went well, I'd be stepping into the realm of top-tier designers. Anthony, who handled all my business dealings as my manager, was equally thrilled. "This is a rare chance we can't pass up," he said. "Opportunities like this don't come often." However, his enthusiasm was tempered by concern. "But what about Mom? You know she'll probably want to tag along," he added, his voice heavy with worry. It was a valid point. Given Isabella's history, there was little doubt she'd try to insert herself into our plans. The prospect of living abroad felt like a dream come true for me. It would be wonderful to experience life overseas, I thought excitedly. When we shared the news with Isabella that weekend, she predictably latched onto the idea. "I want to come too," she blurted out immediately. "We're moving there for work, not leisure," Anthony tried to explain patiently. "It's going to be demanding." But Isabella wasn't having it. "Are you trying to trick me? You just want to live even more extravagantly without me watching over you," she accused. Anthony sighed, trying to reason with her. "We're not moving there permanently, we'll be back after we finish the overseas project." But Isabella wasn't convinced. "You say that now, but I know you plan to leave me behind for good." Her paranoia was exhausting. After what felt like hours of the same back-and-forth argument, Anthony and I were worn out. Finally, Anthony made a compromise. "Look, we can't take you with us, but how about we pay for a week-long trip overseas for you instead?" he offered, clearly desperate to end the conversation. Isabella's eyes lit up. "Really? Are you sure?" she asked, barely containing her excitement. "We'll cover your flight and hotel, but everything else will be on you," Anthony clarified. "Yay, thank you," she exclaimed, leaving our house in high spirits. But the peace was short-lived. A few days later, as Anthony was busy organizing the logistics for our move, Isabella showed up unannounced at our house. "Hey, Scarlett, I've been thinking." Anthony offered to cover my trip, "but I want to do some shopping while I'm there. Can you give me some extra money for that?" I was taken aback. "What about the credit card Anthony gave you?" I asked, knowing she had a card for such expenses. She frowned. "He took it away. Said I was overspending again," she admitted. It seemed Anthony had finally put his foot down, likely worried she would misuse the card with the fluctuating exchange rates overseas. I sighed. "I'm sorry, Isabella, but I can't just give you money without discussing it with Anthony first." "Can't you ask him?" she pressed, her voice rising. "It won't make a difference. He's already decided," I said calmly. Frustrated, she stormed out, her voice echoing through the house as she left. "That's why I'm asking you. He's no help." Over the New Year's holiday, Isabella finally went on her 7-day trip abroad. I assumed Anthony had found some way to smooth things over financially, but when she returned, Isabella dropped a bombshell that none of us could have anticipated. The day she came back, I received a call on my mobile. "I'm back. I had so much fun." On the other end, Isabella was excitedly rattling off details about her sightseeing and dining experiences, none of which I had asked about, and I bought too many souvenirs. I couldn't fit them in my suitcase, so I had them shipped. "Can't wait for them to arrive." "That's nice," I replied, though I was already feeling tired of her rambling. "Thanks to the money you saved up, I had a blast," she added cheerfully. Saved money? What are you talking about? I had no recollection of any significant savings meant for her. Sure, I had money set aside for business emergencies, but that was safely in my bank account, and Isabella certainly didn't have access to it. "You really didn't notice? You're surprisingly oblivious," she said, her tone light, as if she were teasing me. I was completely in the dark. "What are you talking about?" "I found it in the sideboard drawer in your house. $20,000. You really didn't notice it was missing?" she said, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. $20,000? In the sideboard? I couldn't even imagine keeping such a large amount of cash in our house, let alone stashing it in a drawer. Confused and alarmed, I responded, "Isabella, if you took money from our house without permission, that's theft, even if you're family. Do you realize that?" "That's why I'm telling you now," she replied nonchalantly, clearly not grasping the seriousness of what she had done. "I don't know anything about this money, but if you took it and used it without asking, it's a crime, and if that money was something Anthony set aside for an important deal, it's even worse," I said, thinking of the potential fallout if that money had been earmarked for something vital in our business. "You two live so extravagantly, why can't I enjoy a bit of it too? Think of it as a favor to your parent. It's not that big of a deal, right?" Isabella's sense of entitlement was staggering. It wasn't just about taking money, she seemed to believe she had a right to it. "I'm glad you enjoyed your trip, but I'll need to ask Anthony about this money when he gets home," I said, still trying to make sense of the situation. "Anthony will understand. I'm his mother, after all, and $20,000 is nothing to him," she insisted. "All right, I'll pass along the message," I replied, astonished by her complete lack of remorse. "Please do," she added, before hanging up, leaving me even more confused than before. That night, Anthony came home with a troubled look on his face. "Scarlett, do you know anything about the $20,000 I left in the sideboard drawer?" "Wait, You were the one who left that much cash in a drawer? That's careless, don't you think? I said, bewildered. I withdrew it 10 days ago for an urgent payment, but now it's gone, Anthony explained. That's what Isabella took. She just called to thank me for the money, I said, the pieces starting to fall into place. She took it? Anthony asked, his eyes widening in disbelief. But that money was for something serious. Why cash all of a sudden? We've been doing bank transfers for a while now, I asked, still not understanding the full picture. Anthony sighed. After I took away Mom's credit cards, I found out she had been secretly racking up debt from multiple sources, consumer finance cards, new credit cards she opened without telling me. I withdrew the money to repay her debts directly, to avoid her spending it herself. A bank transfer would have left a paper trail in our business accounts, and I didn't want any issues with our partners. That cash was meant to clear her debts before we moved abroad. So, you were planning to pay it off for her, and she just took it? I asked, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. Yes, I was going to take care of it quietly, as a parting gift of sorts, since we won't be able to help her once we move. But now, Anthony trailed off. What's going to happen to her now? I asked. Debt collection notices will start coming in soon, but there's nothing we can do. She spent it on herself, Anthony replied, his tone resigned. A month passed, and as we packed for the move, Isabella's calls to my phone became relentless. Anthony had told me to ignore them, but the sheer number, over 80, made me uneasy. Just as I was debating what to do, my phone rang again. It was Isabella. This time, I hesitated, but eventually, I picked up. Why aren't you answering my calls? Isabella's voice sounded on the verge of tears. I'm sorry, I've been busy with all the moving preparations. What's wrong? I tried to stay calm, ready to hear her out. It's not just one thing, they're demanding payments every day. It's overwhelming. What about Anthony? Have you tried contacting him? He's blocking my calls. I can't get through to him at all. Scarlett, you're my last hope. Please, help me. I was shocked that Anthony had taken such drastic measures, cutting off all communication with his own mother, but after everything, I could understand his frustration. If Isabella hadn't blown through the money Anthony had set aside to pay off her debts, she wouldn't be in this mess. Now, she was drowning in collection letters from finance companies and lenders, and the relentless calls were wearing her down. It sounded like something straight out of a drama, not real life. I'll talk to Anthony, but I can't promise what he'll do, I said cautiously. A mother in trouble, it's a son's duty to help, right? Please, just ask him. She hung up after pleading one last time. But the truth was, we needed our funds for the business expansion overseas. We couldn't afford to bail Isabella out, not when her reckless spending was what led to this in the first place. When I told Anthony about her call later that evening, he was dismissive. I planned to take care of everything before we left, but she squandered that chance herself, he said bluntly. That's true, you had the money ready to settle her debts, and instead, she used it for a luxury vacation. There's no excuse for that. I agreed with his reasoning, though I felt conflicted. After all, Isabella was his mother. Despite my sympathy, I followed Anthony's lead and blocked her number, just as he had. There was nothing more we could do if he had made the decision to cut ties. As our move overseas approached, I focused on packing up the last of our things. The house was still cluttered with reminders of our life here, but soon it would all be behind us. I'd heard through the grapevine that Isabella had sold her house to cover some of her debts, but even that wasn't enough. The $20,000 Anthony had set aside hadn't even scratched the surface of what she owed. Apparently, she had more hidden debts than we realized, so much that even after selling her house and land, she couldn't clear it all. The total amount was staggering. Hey, our family home, it's gone now. Are you okay with that? I asked Anthony one evening. How could I be okay with it? But there's nothing we can do, he said, a hint of sadness in his voice. I could tell it was a heavy loss for him. Losing the house you grew up in, it must feel like a piece of your past disappearing. I knew that feeling all too well, having lost my parents' home at a young age. But for Anthony, it was different. He hadn't just lost a home. He'd lost it because of his living mother's actions. I couldn't even begin to imagine how that must feel. Now, Isabella was living in a small, cheap apartment, scraping by with a part-time job to try and pay off the rest of her debts. At her age, it must have been hard to find work. I felt a flicker of sympathy for her, but in the end, she had made her own choices. Even in old age, people must face the consequences of their actions. As for us, things were going well in our new life overseas. Our business was thriving, and we were getting more inquiries from other brands than I ever imagined. Offers were pouring in from unexpected places, and while I appreciated every opportunity, the pace was intense. I barely had time to sleep, let alone explore the new city around me. Anthony was just as busy, juggling his own responsibilities. At this rate, starting a family felt like a distant dream. As I stared out the window at the unfamiliar cityscape, I couldn't help but wonder when, or if, we'd ever have the time for that next step.